landed the fish. And he looked at me and he says, what kind of mullet is it? And I said, it's a tick lip. He said, I thought they were hard to catch. He said, you just walked down through it out and you caught one. And I kind of said, what am I going to say? And I said, no, they're hard to catch. So he stood beside me and I had a few more casts and I hooked another one and it came off. And I looked at my watch and said, I'm going to be killed. I really need to get going. I thought afterwards, poor chap thinks you just get a fly tied onto a 5 or 6 weight and throw it out and his mullet are just going to start taking it. Little does he know, this could take weeks to start catching them.
Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. With the unseasonably warm weather we've been having lately, although this is probably going to be the new norm anyway, it's also a good time to be casting a fly in the salt, with bass fishing particularly good at this time of year. But how has the 2023 saltwater season been overall? Were the bass biting, and what about other species like pollack and mullet? Guide and instructor Jason O'Riordan joins us on this week's episode to give us some insights into how this season went and why his success targeting mullet has been a standout highlight for him on the Copper Coast.
We'll hear from Jason in a moment, and we have another £50 Fulling Mill voucher to give away later in the show. But first, Dara.
Tom, hold on, I normally do that line.
I know you do. You've just spoiled it. This is my big breakthrough. I've always wanted to do that line.
Next week I'm going to let you do the hello and welcome bit. Like you do one show and you think that's it.
Yeah, you see,
Tom
I'm
on the Fly
creeping
podcast.
Yeah, I'm getting a taste for it now. I really am. I see the big lights. The big lights. Oh, yeah.
So
Anyway,
you had a question for me, did you?
Yeah, you're sidetracking me here now.
I know.
Yeah. So, Dara, now, what was I going to ask you? Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. You've been mullet fishing with Jason, and I have to say, you came back talking to me about it, and you were completely smitten by it. Why?
Because I didn't catch.
Was that it? Was it the challenge?
No, it's the challenge. Yeah, it is. It's the challenge. And again, the reason why I want to talk to Jason this week, and I thought it was very good, is that when I went out fishing with him earlier this year, like, he was really focused on them, and he talks about it on the podcast in terms of kind of how his focus turned to them during it's the heat wave conditions, and we're going to see more of them, but there's a couple of crossover points. One is, and again, he mentioned it in terms of river and lochs anglers, it's more similar as opposed to, just going bass on the fly. You're more likely to be a bass lure angler and you might cross over into the fly. Whereas if you're just a river loch angler, mullet on the fly will appeal. And I think it's the fact that now people like Jason, Colin McLeod before, who've pioneered this stuff, that they're finding success. You mentioned Loch Italia, Tom, that it was, there was mullet, but sure, you can't catch them. So, they're just nice. But now you're actually realizing people are having success with it. And I mentioned as well before, is like, for me, the coast is just this vast expanse of water, in terms of where the hell do you catch fish anywhere there? Like, whereas where you come down, you can go onto the beach or you go to the estuary, and, if the conditions are right, you've timed it right, you see them swirling, feeding there, and they could be only in a foot or two of water, like.
And that's what got me going when you were saying that, because I cast my mind back to Loch Italia, and because I know what it's like. And then, as you were saying there, when you're going fishing and you see them moving like that, and you're geared up, you have the rod in your hand, the anticipation's got to be freaking fantastic. And
it is. And not only that, is it could be the fish of 1,000 casts, in the sense of, and I'm sure this will be perfected, and tweaked as more people do it, and, as it, more kind of methods or whatever that people will kind of perfect it more. But at this stage, it could be 1,000 casts, and you miss a couple, but then you get one, and then I've yet to experience that. But supposedly when you do, but it's seen it. And I remember when I went fishing with Jason, I think the first 2 hours we were in the morning, there was nothing happening, and we were walking up and down the beach, and I was like, come on, like, I think I saw a swirl out. Come on, can we cast? And he's like, no, just hold your horses. And it must have been there, I'd say it's probably about an hour and a half. And then suddenly, whatever the switch was, they started coming in feeding, and you saw the swirls. And then he was like, okay, this is it, go, cast. And of course, my line got tangled, and
oh no.
It's like, because that anticipation where you're like,
white line fever.
I could see Jason going, fucking. But you know what actually reminded me a bit though is Tom is but in fairness we had probably about we probably had another hour and a half then after that of we were moving.
They were still moving. They were still going.
Yeah, it was incredible. Like, but it actually reminded me a little bit when he was talking about in terms of kind of the nervous water when when we were dry fly fishing in the second part of the day, and it was just like timing that cast, getting it right, and you were like cast or strike, and I was like what. I missed it. And it was a bit of that kind of like you just have to get into the rhythm and the feel for it. And I just think it's the more you do it, you'll just
it's like anything I could imagine. Yes, the more you do of anything, you become more comfortable at it.
Yeah, and you just get that timing. You're rough around the edges. Your timing's too fast. It's too slow.
Yeah.
The more you miss, the more you do it. That you just refine it and hone it more, and then you start getting into it. And then you see, like I said, you see Jason. He focused on it this summer, and success he was having doing it.
It's actually been really interesting the chat we have with him, and he deals a lot with how to go after them as well, which is really good as well. He's put a fair amount of work into them, hasn't he?
Yeah, it is, and it's again adapting to the conditions as well. The heat wave we had June, July, and then even in September again, it's ideal for them, And as he mentions, it's October now. He's turning back to the bass, and I'm hoping to get out myself, kind of October, November before it kind of really kind of shuts down, just to get line out in the water again. But it's just I suppose adapting to that and kind of anticipating what's the fishing going to be like, and like I'm kind of can't wait now for next summer to try and have a go at it again.
Actually, you just said it there. Will you try and get out for a bass?
Yeah, I will. Things have calmed down. Ireland are out of the World Cup, unfortunately, but it's calmed down work-wise.
Every cloud has a silver lining. See you more now.
I can actually start to breathe now, but I've got hoping to get out the end of the month. Bit of pike fishing actually booked in October as well, November as well. But so look, I suppose this episode was we did kind of focus on Bullet on the Fly. It was kind of we did want to kind of review the saltwater season because there was the bass, and Jason does talk about the different conditions and how that kind of affected the fishing. So I think it's very interesting overall, and I do think people will learn a lot from this. And you never know. Looking forward to next season. I might whet their appetite to have a go at it. So look, let's get back to this week's guests and Jason O'Riordan and the focus on this 2023 saltwater season. And I first asked Jason to give us a rundown of how it went for him.
I suppose it starts for me saltwater wise around May. I do a bit of loch fishing before that in March, April, and early May, and then you kind of start getting the weather for saltwater then at that stage. So I look back just obviously because you had said we'd be having a look, a bit of a review there, and the weather, it's a bit like ask anyone. I think this year really the weather has had mad effect. So for me, probably May, some years even April are good. This season, we had a lot of cold wind. I think it was probably close to June before it really started to pick up. And normally, early season is kind of bass. And this year, it wasn't great for me, really, to be honest. So I just switched over to the mullet because we got that heat wave, and, the mullet were just everywhere down here with that weather. So it was a kind of a case of guiding wise, we kind of looked at kind of a mixed bag just to suit the conditions. So we were doing a bit of bass and a bit of mullet. And you will find probably June, July, you get a lot of smaller schoolie bass unless you're going to fish nighttime, and most tourists don't want to be fishing at night. Most guides, Tom will tell you with the cane is most guides don't want to be out at all sorts of hours either, really, to be fair. And it's hard to, what you'd have to charge people if you were going fishing at 3 o'clock in the morning all the time, and that then as well is a factor. So
why is the nighttime? Is it because they're getting more spooked, or what is it?
I think it's only theory. My theory is if we get good conditions in late April, May, fishing is easier. And I think that's probably because they're a bit hungrier after spawning.
Jason,
a bit more...
just one thing there. What quantifies good conditions? in April?
Heat, rising
Heat.
water
Okay, so
temperature.
basically what you're looking for is a rise in water temperature from April.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking for. All right. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah. So like if we don't get a rise in water temperature, I think something around 12 degrees is sort of what you're looking for. From that on up, um, again, people be listening to podcasts and maybe, lower anglers and to say, well, I'll catch them at 10 degrees. But, I think to get the bass active after spawning, I think anyway, 12 or 13 degrees is kind of your starting point. If you get, a bit more like 14, 15 in terms of water temperature, then they're going to be more active. So that helps. I think they're a bit more dumb because they're hungry. And I suppose, to be fair, they're not seeing a lot of lures or flies. They haven't seen them in a while. Probably as time goes on with the developments in lures and lads are putting in more time in December and January, that window is probably not as big as it was in terms of the fish not seeing lures. But I definitely look. I subscribe to the theory: if they see enough lures and you throw a fly at them, you're maybe more likely to take a fly at that stage even.
Was it all fly, Jason, for you this year, even for the bass?
Yeah. There was the way it went. Really, for me, in daytime, bright conditions, you have two options: you fish at night or you fish a current. So you look for somewhere with a current. So you've got a flow of water similar to a river. The fish are less spooky in the bright sun. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if you get big tides in the early morning or evening and the lower light conditions. The other thing is schoolies in shoals is a kind of feeding frenzy. So again, smaller fish in shoals, cast into them, you have a good chance of hitting fish. Larger fish, you're probably talking about fishing dawn, dusk, or nighttime.
is it akin to like brownies? I'll look at the crossover here between freshwater and saltwater. But like because I do a fair whack of night fishing, and I find that the bigger fish are more comfortable going around at the top of the water at nighttime. I think that's the best way of putting it. I wouldn't say they're speaking; they're just more comfortable, whereas you wouldn't see them doing it as often during the daytime. Would the bass be similar?
Well, one of the things I'd say, if you look at loch fishing in March, April, where you're fishing primarily lures, when I say lures, I mean is in a fly, minky, zonkers, that type of thing, you'll get big fish. That if you fish the same fly a month later, I don't think you'll get fish. The hatches have started, fish have put on condition. I'd say the bass are somewhat the same. They've spawned, they're lean, they're hungry, start off a bit lethargic, the water's cold. Same fishing for trout above, mass carb. They're not going to chase things at 50 miles an hour in cold water. So it's a bit like that. And then again, food items start to appear. They get more plentiful. Water's getting warmer. Fish get more picky, I'd say, to some extent. And then wild fish, they're spooky. You stand up on a rock with a fly rod and you're making a couple of double hauls and this thing is flashing, in the bright sunshine, and you expect these fish to come swimming over beside you. And look, we're dealing with fly fishing from a guiding point of view. A lot of lads are starting out, so they're not going to be really proficient casters. So you don't want to be fishing certain marks where you have a wave and a wind into your face, because they're just, it's just making life too hard for them. So you're going to go for areas where the wind's behind, or a bit more sheltered, it's a bit more comfortable. But that means calmer water, cleaner water, easier to spook the fish. And you will find, like for me, in that time of year, I'm fishing lighter rods, longer leaders, lighter leaders. So you catch more fish, but the amount of bigger fish, obviously, are kind of scattered in between the small fish. But having said that, if you get a fish 2 pound weight on a 5 weight, be it a trout or a sea trout or a bass, it's our mullet. It's still a good fight. Like it's good sport. Like,
because of the cold that we had in the spring. You reckon that kind of just put a stop on things early season, or how would you describe it? Like,
I suppose, look, it makes it difficult. And, normally I go out, put in a good bit of recon before I start guiding lads, and people would be emailing me and I'd be putting them off. I know you're losing money from a guiding point of view, but long term, I think if you keep bringing lads when the conditions are bad, you know what I mean? They're just going to say, you go down there, you go fishing for these saltwater species and you catch nothing. And you know yourself, Dara, I mean, say, when you were coming down for the mud, like I'd say, look, don't come this week. Wait and we see if the weather is right, conditions are right. You want to give lads the best chance. And north winds, east winds, they're not good for most types of fishing, really. And then we got a load of rain, you might remember at times as well. And, that dirties up the water. You get a lot of fresh water. Like bass will tolerate fresh water, but like you're fishing flies. It's hard. If you want to fish a fly in murky water, sometimes at night as well, if you're looking for profile, you're looking for, getting closer to pike flies.
Going that big, like?
You would, yeah. You would just so that bulky heads on the flies create the disturbance. You can add rattles. Black, funny enough, is a great contrast colour in murky water at night as well. A lot of black in the fly. So again, you're into the thing. You need a 9-weight to throw these things to be, I know people, again, really good casters might cast a certain distance on a 7 or an 8. But for most lads, you're looking at a 9-weight. And then you're looking at just getting a bit of distance with it. And it's hard. It's just tough. And, bass session, you're looking at probably 4 hours plus. They tend to be either 2 hours either side of high or 2 hours either side of low. Or, certain marks you're fishing in the middle of. It's hard work casting, 9 weights. I know they're probably lighter than they used to be at that, but it's hard work casting and stripping these big flies, for long periods. And some of the places we fish, they're not dangerous in terms of climbing in rocks too much, but there's a lot of walking and, it's hard going for a lad he wants to enjoy it,
It's meant to be fun, Jason.
Yeah.
Is there many, because obviously my kind of experience, even of seeing other lads fishing for bass, it's mainly kind of lure, spinning with lure rods. Are they few and far between the kind of bass fly only anglers?
I don't see too many in the area around here. Most of them are lads who, you do a podcast or you do something like that and they decide to come down having a scope around. They might go to a tackle shop, get a bit of advice, and they'll come and look. A lot of those lads then, if they don't know the area and where to go in different wind directions, even, they're going to struggle just to find a decent spot. A few obvious spots and you'll meet them. A couple of lads that'll be just fly fishing, but very few. Lads are into it. A few local lads here, you know what I mean, getting into it a bit more. And funny enough, they don't want to lure fish anymore. There's one lad this year now, we spent a good bit of time with him, mullet fishing, and he just won't pick up a spinning rod again. Like,
but I suppose there, though, Jason, like for anybody, let's say, who started off themselves, probably easier to find areas going around and fishing the lure. You can search the water probably better with it and move on. And then I suppose, like if you're building up a repertoire for yourself, let's say somebody's just going off and they have a piece of coastline that they want to work on, they can find the areas probably better and then graduate onto the fly fishing.
If you asked me that a few years ago, and it probably was on similar types of podcasts, I would have said yeah. I actually wouldn't say it now. Because of what you said, you can cover so much water with lures that are so hard to copy with a fly that I think now you're better off to look for locations that are suitable for fly fishing and fly fish them. Because if you go out in the rocks, and let's say you need to cast 50 or 60 yards or whatever it is, and you're using 15 or 20 pound braid and 10-foot spinning rod and a 20 gram or 30 gram lure, you'll get it out there. You might hook a bass at 10 feet. He could have followed it most of the ways in. So what happens sometimes is places that are productive enough spinning where you're meeting the bass at distance, you're never, or like within reason, you're rarely going to catch them then on the fly because you're never covering them. And equally, like if you're fishing, let's take Tremor for instance, like Tremor, they would fish, I would say 30, 40 gram jigs, I'm guessing, because of the flow of tide. Dungarvan, you're probably, places I used to fish jig heads, you're probably looking at in around 18 grams. And now you're going to go down with your sinking line, right? Pick the fastest one you have, like equivalent to, say, a DI8. You know, they're talking about 20 grams up to get your fly down there. You know, there's places that were really productive for me, deep pools, you know, and channels and stuff where it was when I was to spin. And I just really difficult to catch on the fly there.
It's interesting because you know yourself, Tom, you know, the kind of typical picture you think of the bass angler is on the rocks, you know, the waves crashing around, throwing the lure out. Stereotypical bass kind of ground is, but maybe we need to be thinking now with the fly rod, let's start thinking differently.
Yeah, I mean, that type of ground, again, it goes back to what Tom said earlier about low light conditions, dusk and dawn. The fish will come in closer for a short period there. And they will stay in fly range, and you don't need the surf to get the fish moving because it's just, you know, the light conditions and they're hunting, and it's kind of a prime time for bass anyway. But I mean, as you said, the typical what you see in photographs, waves going over your head, even if you can get the fly out, trying to control the line. Right, trust me, right? If you're standing up on a rock over that, trying to control the line between your rod tip and that fly. I mean, like, think about how fast you'd have to strip that to get movement into the fly, because the waves are moving so fast towards you. Like, you know, all I see is tangles, right? Frustrated anglers, you know, and again, take beach fishing, right, on surf beaches. You know, to cast out over the waves, even at night. I put a good bit of time in on some of the beaches down here at night trying it. And, you know, the lads near me were catching, spinning and that. And it's not that it was deep, but in my experience, the distance that they were covering with the lures, I was catching flounder. Oh, Jay, you know, if you wanted to catch flounder now and have a bit of fun on a flyer with flounder, this was great. If you're actually trying to catch the bass. And again, you see.
What was the shortfall there, Jason? Was it distance?
Distance at night, yeah.
Yeah.
Distance
And
at night.
Is it to get it out beyond the breaking waves or what? Now I'm asking this because I haven't a clue
No,
how to fly cast on a surf, right? So I'm just very interested by this now. So if I roll up to a beach, I mean, am I trying to get out beyond the breaking waves or what?
Well, at night there's no waves. You're looking for flat cam.
So you want flat cam, yeah?
Flat cam, shallow beaches, shallow surf beaches. That's what most of the lads would be lure fishing. I know, look, you might be catching, but ideally would say, you know, down here, surf beaches, flat cam, summer night, low water, say 12 o'clock, so you're fishing into the dark, be just about dusk and you're starting. You turn on a headlamp, sand eels coming out from under your feet. You kind of know there's bass around, they're going to be feeding. And the lads are throwing out the lures, 50 yards down from me, and they're whacking bass. I'm here killing myself with my fly rod. And you walk up the beach and I say, yeah, I waded out to my waist and I was catching them 2 rod lengths away. I'm all right, 2 rod lengths away. And then you're not catching them. And you can get, you can try tube flies. You can get the flies to behave the same way as the lures are behaving. Making that V in the surface film is kind of a typical one that really seems to attract them at night on those conditions. But again, that soft plastics and the lures the lads are, and I used to use, when I did a lot of spinning, I mean, you only have to lob this thing with 20-pound braid and it's gone out to the horizon.
Yeah.
So look, the conclusion, I could be wrong. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I don't know. You just don't know in fishing, but the conclusion I came to was that I wasn't reaching the fish. I wasn't drawing the fish into me. Because the beaches I'm thinking of they're quite shallow out for a long distance.
It's interesting. But tell me, so if you're a fly angler and you're thinking, you know, I wouldn't mind having to go at the bass, ignore the photos that you're seeing of the rocks and the waves. What's the fly angler looking for?
Yeah, I think someone starting out into saltwater fly fishing that hasn't got much of experience of fishing into the wind, like some reservoir anglers would have, maybe fishing from the shore would have a reasonable experience. And competition anglers, where you've no choice, you're pegged and the wind is blown into your face, and you have to be able to cast, or you're not going to be probably winning much. They'll manage to cast into the wind, and Tom will tell you this, in terms of buzzers and certain techniques. If you can't control what the fly is doing, you're not at much, and that's the problem with surf, controlling it. You'll see lads using switch rods, and in the States they do a bit of fly fishing in the surf for striped bass and that, and they use longer rods. They call them switch rods. Are probably not the same as our kind of salmon switch rods. I think they're a bit different, a few I've seen, but in the daytime in a small surf where you can cast over it with a longer fly rod and control what the fly is doing. I don't care if it's salmon, trout. If you can't control what your fly is doing, I think you're not. It's not productive fishing. Like.
So, what kind of ground are you looking for, Jason?
I think for someone starting off, estuaries.
Okay.
Right. You're going to be starting off in the summer. Really, if you think about it, you're starting off in the summer months. You probably want to fish in the daytime. You don't want to go wandering around in the nighttime straight off. So
straight in at the deep end, yeah.
Flow of water. You've a current. You've usually got nice coves or bays or sandy places where you can fish closer to high water, where schoolies are going to be patrolling. You're going to see surface activity. You're going to see mullet. You're going to maybe see sea trout. Keeps you casting, keeps you going. Most lads can't tell a bass from a mullet swirling around the place, so it just keeps them casting. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because the bass and mullet will swim around the same ground anyway. And you've movement. In the summer months, June, July, movement in the water is a big help, like a current.
And in fairness, actually, I found it, Jason. I remember the times when I'd gone out and say you would have been kind of spinning, and it's kind of intimidating when you're not used to fishing the coast, and and I think we mentioned this before, it's just got this massive expanse of water. You don't see fish because it's the surf, it's the rocks. You could be casting for a couple of hours. If you're inexperienced, you don't know if they're just not there, if you're doing something wrong. You're kind of casting just really not knowing. Whereas I do like that idea, like I said, is if you're actually seeing fish swirling in the conditions, at least you're casting to something like.
Yeah, and look, calm conditions, shallow water, you'll either see fish moving if you're clued in, and you have to be clued in sometimes. Again, it's like some of the fish, like the mullet, sometimes it's only nervous water. Other times they're crashing around and it's very easy. Bass are probably easier to pick out coming in on the incoming tide. I think that they're crashing, they're chasing, they're feeding harder. Some of the spots I fish for mullet, I remember a local lad that moved to the UK years ago, and he does the Orvis mullet, and bass saltwater festival most years. And he was over home for a while, and he said, look, we go and do a session at more interested in the mullet. We fished a session early morning, and then we went to fish a low water mark. And I said, we go down here now, and the mullet are over there. I said, how did you find them? I couldn't see them. I said, I saw them from the car. I obviously used to looking at them. And the first time I came on them, I think I saw them from the car and then walked down to investigate. And they're not splashing around in this mark. Like, they're just barely dimpling around the place. But you get used to what you're looking for. And, it's like, I suppose, I want to put words in it, one of Tom's sayings, if you think it was a fish, it probably was a fish.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see movement and you think it was a fish, and there's not a duck or an otter or something there. Yeah.
And it's interesting, actually, Jason, because that's what leads me on to, so June came, the heat wave came, and it's interesting what you're saying for people starting out, if you're around the estuary, calmer waters, you're suddenly seeing a lot more mullet. Mullet have been this kind of fish that you can't catch them on the fly. And only through the likes of Colin McLeod, who's kind of, pioneered this and kept at it for years, suddenly they're becoming this, not the new bass, shall we say, but they're certainly growing, especially from interest for the fly angler. You might tell us why they're of such interest to the fly angler now.
Well, I suppose the deterioration in other types of fishing. I mean, this year, I think a lot of the river anglers will tell you it started off too cold, no hatches, no fish coming up. Again, it's the same in the river. A lot of lads just don't want to be just chucking nymphs all day, every day. They're looking forward to a bit of dry fly fishing, fish moving, evening rise. And I think particularly the wind direction, and then the floods were killing it for a lot of the guys. Then you get a heat wave and the river's down its bones and it gets sulky. You could go fishing for mullet with much the same tackle and see loads of fish swimming around you. And obviously the frustrating part is catching them. But, it gives you a target to cast at, And I think a lot of anglers, I'm sure it's the same on the lakes with some anglers just want to dry fly fish or they want to cast at fish. They could be very competent at other methods. But, it's the same as anything. And then look, salmon fishing. I think I only did a couple of days this year, guided salmon. And a lot of those days we fished salmon in the morning and came back and fished for mullet or bass in the afternoon. And it was interesting. One guy, we were very lucky. We fished the upper Blackwater around Ballyhooly. He lost a fish the first day and he got a fish the second day. A nice enough salmon, a couple of pound weight. Yet he spoke more about the one mullet and a couple of schoolie bass he caught than the salmon. And I think he had spent a week in Iceland or somewhere. He hadn't had a great week salmon wise for maybe the rivers over there that particular week. It might have been just bad luck or whatever. But it was interesting to me afterwards. It was all about this one mullet and these bass. You think salmon the holy grail of fish, but it's the challenge too. I can tell you, right, you can be a very competent angler. And I've seen really competent, like we'll say high competition standard anglers trying having a pop at mullet and not catching them, it's not easy. And then it is easy as well, as you know, Dara, when you're in the right place at the right time, you will get takes.
If you're a fly tyer or want to get into fly tying, then this is for you. Ireland on the Fly have teamed up with Fulling Mill to give away a box of fly tying materials with free shipping to one lucky listener each week.
With more than 1,400 products to choose from, each perfectly packed by hand, their new range of fly tying materials warrants closer inspection. The range of dubbing materials is comprehensive to cover whatever you want to dress, from tiny dries to saltwater streamers. It is all there, and some great UV mixes as well. From the individually preened marabou feathers to the top secret treatment applied to their new ultra-dry yarn, the whole range is packed with standout new products, all generously served up for your benefit in a neat array of colours and sizes.
From zonkers to CDC, bucktail to deer belly, just be sure to check it out for yourselves. And to be in with a chance of winning £50 worth of materials, just answer the following question.
Name the species of fish that was Jason O'Riordan's most memorable fish on the fly this season.
Email your answer to info@irelandonthefly.com and we'll announce the winner on next week's show. And congrats to Paul Coates, who is the latest winner, and Paul will be in touch. And this for me, Jason, is what is the most appealing, I think, is because... are you seeing it as mainly river anglers that are kind of converting to the mullet as opposed to it's bass anglers thinking, I'll try now for the mullet?
Yeah, I think for me, in general... when you think bass anglers, they're lure anglers. And bass lure anglers are generally bass anglers, right?
Hardcore.
And they may graduate from lure fishing to fly fishing for bass, right? Do you know what I mean? And then it's a long process to go from that to, say, something like mullet. Whereas a river angler, trout angler, can convert across to fishing for mullet in terms of tackle and tactics and that. Or a lake angler particularly, actually, I would say. I would say it's actually probably easier for a lake angler to mullet fish than even the modern, if you like, river angler who wants to be doing a lot of nymphing. You know, the lads that probably are very successful in competitions and that do a lot of, I know they have to be successful, they have to be able to fish most methods, but the nymphing is kind of the winning tactic, isn't it?
Are you going to tell us that the lob doesn't work on the mullet?
Yeah, it's not that I haven't tried it now, mind you.
But come here, Jason. I just want to ask you: would you say then that mullet will be different to bass, and that it's probably easier to catch mullet on fly than it is to catch bass on fly? Would that be right?
No, no way. It's easier to catch bass.
But how else would you catch mullet? You won't catch them spinning. This is what I'm saying.
Well, you can. Yeah, you can catch them spinning.
And is it easier to catch them spinning than on the fly? This is what I'm saying. Like what I'm saying to you is, if you look at bass fishing, there's no doubt, but the way you're saying, it's easier to catch bass lure fishing. That's what I'm saying. Than it is, because you can cover more ground. You like what you said down in Tremor, you can cast out your 30-gram lure on 20-pound braid, and it's gone out 60 meters, which you won't get that on your fly rod. But judging by what you're saying about mullet, it's very visual. And I could see why lake anglers would like it, because you're presenting something to me, and I can visualize it, and I'm kind of liking it because I got a cover fish, right? But what I'm saying is, lure fishing, if you saw the fish moving, like, you wouldn't go after them with the lure, would you? The mullet in an estuary.
No, lads do. They spin. Basically, it's a Meps with a trace out the back, and Maddies, which is a harbour worm.
Yeah.
But again, that's fish bred for mullet. You know what I mean? And the ground bait weeds with maggots in them for mullet. That's not the same thing as what we're talking about here, say, this evening. We're talking about going after mullet with flies, which is what Dara was saying about Colin McLeod. He just went with flies, no natural bait.
Yeah.
And I would say, look, it's probably easiest to catch bass on bait, crabs and lugworm. Then the next probably easiest one for somebody is to spin. And then the next one is bass. But if bass are feeding and you throw something in front of them, there's a good chance they're going to grab it.
Yeah.
I think bigger bass can be selective. And that happened to me this year with one particularly big fish. I covered that fish with a fry pattern, then with a gurgler, and then with a shrimp. I changed my leader, changed my setup very quickly, changed to a shrimp pattern, and he nailed it within 3 casts. I couldn't see the fish, as in visually see the fish, but I saw him swirling beside me. Maybe there was more than one big fish, but there not going to be a lot of fish, when you're talking about 8 pound plus. There are not going to be too many of them together. So that was a particular fish that he didn't want the bait fish. He didn't want the gurgler. Yet he threw a shrimp at him, a couple of casts, he absolutely walloped it. But if I started with a shrimp, you know what I mean, and he was feeding on shrimp, I had him. Mullet can be feeding away on, we'll say we think they're feeding on shrimp. And as Darryl tell you, we can make 1,000 casts at them before one of them is going to grab it. And we can definitely see them.
But I think it's like what you said, Jason, is the bass anglers, generally, they're lure anglers. That's their quarry, and that's how generally the method is. And this is why I think mullet fishing is interesting for the fly angler, because it's just a closer branch of the sport, whether you're a lake, river, and you're casting to, fish that you're seeing. And that's why I wanted to chat to you, is because I think it's really interesting, kind of maybe the development for you this year. Not that you've cracked or decoded the mullet on the fly secret, but you've kept at it. I think that's really interesting. This year you kind of made a concerted effort, didn't you, to really go after them, and you've had a fair bit of luck. Yeah,
I mean, look, conditions dictated it. The anglers were quite happy because we were using pretty much the same equipment. You're just changing the flies from, we'll say, a little bit larger bass flies to a little bit smaller mullet flies. It's exciting stuff. They're all around you. In the earlier part of June, they were a bit easier to catch when they sort of arrived first. I had sessions where I wasn't working too hard and I've 8 or 10 mullet. If I was fishing myself, I had lads out at the early sessions, decent anglers, would say not total novices is what I mean. I mean, decent is probably not the best word. They were getting maybe 4 or 5 and losing another 4 or 5. They were getting the takes, but I would say if you asked me to go and get an angler to bring down to catch mullet, I would, and I have one coming down to me next year, who I'd say has fished for Ireland a few times. Give me a stillwater angler, right? As in not even a lock style, give me a stillwater angler that's competent with the bung and that's competent pulling wetzel lures. And I think that guy will catch fish. That guy will catch mullet,
Why has it been, and, obviously, like we mentioned Colin McLeod, in terms of what he's pioneered as well, but like, I definitely think you're kind of, leading the charge where you are down there, Jason, in terms of really going after the mullet on the fly. Maybe just take us through kind of, tips for fly anglers wanting to go after the mullet.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things. We all have to get information from somewhere. Colin wrote his book, and I'd recommend anyone starting off to get the book. He'd probably shoot me. I don't have the book, right? It was a conscious decision. I just wanted to do it myself. But again, I had seen a lot of Colin's flies and so on. Do you know what I mean? It was not, without having the book, I was well aware, do you know what I mean, of the flies he was using and some of the tactics he was using. And that's why I say to anyone, get his book. Do you know what I mean? The second thing is there's some good YouTube videos, but they're different, right? There's another guy as well, Darren Jackson, who probably should get a mention. He fishes, I think, down near to Wales. I'm not 100% sure. He fishes where the algae starts to go brown. So at the moment, the last couple of weeks, I've been friends with him on social media, and that he's doing really well. I mean, he's had sessions, I think, where they've had maybe 20 plus mullet. So they fish beaches where this sort of white algae turns a brown color, and when it starts off, it's toxic, but then it actually gets very nutritious for the fish, and the mullet really hone in and is sort of sift around through this stuff. And he'd video up in the last few days, and I mean, just look at these mullet going bonkers in the first little wave. We don't get that where I am. I'm not saying that there isn't other beaches, you know what I mean, in the south of Ireland that do. We don't get that here. So there's no point me heading off. Do you know what I mean? I know the beaches around here, fishing the way Darren is. And then, some of the lads are fishing up the estuaries in the UK, and they've really nice videos of how they're fishing the bung. We don't get exactly that in my area. We get something like it. And there's some places we fish with the bung and it's really productive. So I think, you have to watch these videos. You have to, read the books if it's available to you. But you have to be able to adapt, and there's different species of mullet. And, again, Colin would say, different retrieves, different behaviors.
Would they fish differently for the different species?
Yeah, there's basically, you're looking at tins, ticks, and gold and grey.
Yeah.
And the gold and grey in our area here, they come in over shallow, sandy ground. And they're in big shoals. And they feed and they move at quite a pace. The tins and ticks, sometimes we get them in the same areas. A lot of the times they go up little river channels, drains, places like that. You'll see them in harbours, under boats, under boat docks. Sneaky, I call them sneaky fish, right? You're talking about going down in the muck, crawling around with your bung, flicking out your flies and waiting for these fellas to swim over and take it. And you're not doing like loads of casting. The golden greys, on the other hand, are coming at you in droves, in shoals. And, it's more wet fly style, casting and retrieving. You can drift, but where I fish for them, one spot you can either drift the flies or fish a bung. Another spot I do a good bit of fishing in, you have to retrieve the flies, we've tried all the different ways, and that's what works. But so I think, like I say, I think if you can wet fly fish and if you can fish the bung well, those two methods will cover all three species, and it's up to you to adapt. Like,
from their surface activity, can you tell which species they are?
You couldn't always be 100% sure where I am, but you generally know the goldens. They are very active.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I've caught a good few sessions where I've caught goldens and tick lips. And the tick lips were a bit more lethargic, moving around, a bit more spooky too, actually, to be fair.
Yeah.
Remember being on a high vantage point casting at a couple that I could see, and like, you only get one or two shots at them and they moved off. With the golden grey stater, you could make bad casts and splashy casts, and
I like golden grey. I like them.
Yeah.
Which are the bigger ones?
The goldens tend to be smaller.
Okay.
Early season this year, as goldens go, we had some decent ones. Probably, if I had gone to the trouble of weighing them or measuring them properly, I'd be surprised if I hadn't a few specimen size. I think
which is
like, probably 2.5 pounds to 3 pounds is probably a decent. It's a good golden. I definitely had a good few over 2 pounds, and probably some close to 3 pounds earlier in the year. But that's kind of not a big interest to me, as in like specimens, and that it just doesn't interest me. But no, and we tended to get smaller ones as the season went on, for whatever reason. Another next year could be different, but this year, where we put a lot more time, and it was great. Like, I went down a few times. It was lads coming down from the shore, and it was two chaps I met a couple of times. And just they put in, I'd say at least a week, if not 2 or 3 weeks until they eventually caught their mullet. And that was their target. And they were trout anglers. They had a good grasp of angling and fly fishing, and they had to work really hard. Like,
so what are you looking for, Jason? Are you looking for kind of like heat wave, flat cam, hot weather, constant, over a couple of days, couple of weeks kind of thing?
For the golden greys, definitely, and clear water as well. That didn't have any great success in dirty water. Calmer, bright sun. Oh, I love bright sun for golden greys. Brighter the better. Forget the overcast thing. Brighter the better. The other ones, ticks and tins, when you're going up into drains and little rivers and stuff with the tide, that's okay, because you're normally sheltered. So they're a good option. They're a good option. Say in tougher conditions. A lot of times they're almost there all the time. They just come down the stream and back up the stream. There's a few places they're kind of there all the time. But again, turning the tide at low water, they might just get active around that time and feed. So fish that are there kind of all the time, the trick is then what time are they feeding?
And is it like with bass where you target the kind of 2 hours before and 2 hours after the high tide?
No, with the ticks and tins, mostly in the channels where we are, you're really trying to figure out what time of the tide they're feeding, and if there's a pattern. And if you get a pattern, of course, they're feeding at that time of the tide today and tomorrow, unless maybe conditions change a lot, like you get a flood comes down the river or shifts them or something. The goldens are kind of a bit more predictable. They just come on the incoming tide and they're feeding. But there are little tricks within that. Sometimes the golden are rushing at you and it looks like they're feeding, but they're not. They're actually heading to somewhere to feed. Might pick one or two up, but if you can find where they stop, so if you're on a beach and you can find where they stop, then you're in business. So now you're not casting at groups of 10 or 15 going past you. You're actually casting at 10 or 15 that are stopped in front of you. And that's, again, that just gives you more casts at them and they're feeding, and that helps. Now, the other thing, I suppose, just for people who wouldn't be used to it, a lot of times, like Colin would say, a lot of time about wading out and casting back into the shore, like they're literally knee deep, maybe even half that depth. They really are in shallow, like, and it's gin clear. And you can see them. Like, not like, I mean, as in when they stop to feed, you can actually see the whole fish, like bonefish, like they're right in front of you. And I didn't bonefish, but I presume they're probably closer to us than what you see in the videos the lads bonefishing. Like, I mean, you could be casting 2 rod lengths.
So does that mean, like, kind of, I suppose the September kind of heat wave we had was kind of great conditions, and then as we've gotten into maybe the cooler temperature, the days of October, they're kind of moved on, or it's kind of finished?
Yeah, there's 1 or 2 places I've seen them, but to me, once you get into late August, September, bass starts to just come back, because you've this chance of bigger fish, or a more consistent chance of bigger fish. And you've had your fun with the mullet, like,
Now, do you actually go back to the bass because the bass come on and leave the mullet? But are the mullets still there to be caught? This is what I'm asking. Or do you actually purposely leave the mullet because, hey, I'm going to catch a big bass?
Last year, we picked up a couple of nice mullet. God, it could have even been into October, but we weren't really after them, right? We were fishing for bass. Mullet will feed on whatever is in front of them sometimes. If you have a lot of bait fish, they can take bait fish, and they will occasionally snap at a bait fish pattern. So you might be fishing a bait fish pattern, at dawn for bass, and catch 1 or 2 mullets sometimes. And we did, but this year, not so much. There's 1 or 2 spots where I'm seeing them. I'm not seeing the activity we saw early in the season. So it's a mixture of the mullet's not great at the minute,
right?
And the bass fishing should be in its prime. So yeah, and look, even if the mullet was really good, personally, I'd go at the bass.
Right. Yeah, because you want to catch that big bass, don't you?
Yeah, it's a bit of that, and like you've had all summer where you really, from a fly fishing point of view, you're generally not getting big bass. So September, October, good, if you get good water temperature and favourable conditions in November, that's kind of, you don't have a big window, so you're going to go at them.
Now's your time. Come here, I just wanted to ask you one thing there, Jason, and you mentioned it. The equipment. Let's say somebody's going to give the mullet a go. What are you looking at? 5 weight, 6 weight, 7 weight? Obviously not a 9 weight, I would take it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like most fish. You can catch them on just any weight in a sense, but that's just kind of, we can say things you could say, but there's a few things. Poor Dara's in the firing line now again. I would use a 9 foot for a 5.
Right.
But I would probably recommend to most people a 9 for a 6.
Right.
If you're going with a 9 for a 5, for me anyway, and the fishing we're doing, it needs to have a bit of backbone, or whatever way you want to describe that in action, or that it needs to have a bit of backbone. Some of the 5s are kind of like a river dry fly, or an older style river dry fly before people started using 3 weights and that kind of thing. And if you have to cast and retrieve, then I think the rod needs a bit of backbone. We've often had that conversation ourselves in the boat about, fishing a 7 weight for small trout in certain lakes because you needed it to set the hook. A lot of the guys in the UK, they're talking about using glass fly rods.
Yeah.
And
on what grounds?
Well, they obviously have their reasons. To me, it's probably related to not losing fish. So it's obviously got to do with setting the hook and that initial, we'd say flex or whatever. They're notorious fish for falling off when you're trying to set the hook. I can't say I've had, like I've had a lot of lads out with different rods, and a couple of local lads that are doing a lot of it, using different rods. And when you're retrieving, when you're fishing the bung or drifting, it's fairly easy. I won't say they hook themselves, but it's setting the hooks easy enough. You know, especially with the bunkers, you've a sighter. So you're kind of stripping and lifting it, it's easy enough. When you're just casting and retrieving, you have to strike. And I think you kind of you're almost stripping and lifting. It's a strange movement, but when you're doing a lot of it, you kind of get clued into it, and then you don't lose as many fish. You know, certain days you might, but most of the time you won't. And it's hard because you might be after making 50 casts or 100 casts, and you get this one take, and invariably it gets messed up. The more competent, the more takes you get. So, you know, if you're on hooking 50% of them, you know, so if you hook 4 or 5 and you get 2 or 3, you forget about the 2 you didn't get. But when you only get 1 or 2 chances, and you don't, or you hook him and he jumps and falls off, it is, it's hard, but it keeps people going back. It's little steps. You know, you can't hook one, then I hooked one and lost them, and then, you know, I hooked one and landed it. And it's just but yeah, 9 foot, or you could use a 10, I suppose. The 9 for 6 is what I'd recommend, because I think even if the rod's a little bit soft, it'll be a little bit beefier than a 5 that's soft. Floating line all the time. Now, I haven't experimented with intermediates, just everybody says a floater, and that's what I've been doing as well. But it's probably maybe for some of the, I do wonder, probably next year might see a bit of experimentation, as you know. No point telling me you can't or it doesn't work anyway.
I've had you often enough in the boat, Jason.
Tell me that fly won't work, Tom, out in the deeps.
What do you have that line with you for, Jason? Well, I'm going to use it now, he says.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a go. So in terms of the hookups, when you're casting and retrieving, like, we'd probably all say lake fishing will hook more fish on the intermediate than the floater.
Yeah.
You know, wet fly style. And that's what has me thinking about just the style of fishing we're doing. And sometimes with the golden greys, and this is probably maybe a bit different to what you might read sometimes in the books and that, sometimes we are ripping the fly back. And normally, you know, the advice would be a steady retrieve. Sometimes it's just where we're fishing. I had a guy down a few weeks ago in tide. I mean, the tide was outgoing. It looked like a puddle, right, where a little tiny drain was coming down, and it must have been 50 or 60 mullet inside in it. It looked like mostly golden greys, not big, and we could see they're like a shrimp, but they're a particular kind of mud shrimp. They were chasing them so hard that like half the fish's back was out of water, and the shrimps were trying to jump onto the dry land to get away. They kind of skipped or hopped along the top of the water, and then they were trying to get away, and sure, then it just go back in and the mullet would eat them. But we sat there, we didn't fish for a good while. We just sat watching them. Amazing. You know. But it was really interesting just to watch something like that, you know. And you have that advantage when you're guiding and you're not fishing, that you can you know the same with lakes and stuff like that. You see things that you probably don't notice if you're fishing. But yeah, and then leader. Oh yeah, do I have to mention the word tippet, because I get my comeuppance if I use the word tippet around here? It's a
tippetitis.
Yeah, tippetitis. Yeah, tippetrauma.
Tippetrauma, you name it. Yeah.
Personally, I would use 0.20. You could go a bit higher if you were fishing snaggier ground, ropes and stuff like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you're fishing for some of the ticks, and if the water's a little bit discolored with the ticks in you know, harbors and that, then they're not going to see it. You could definitely go heavier for the goldens when you're stripping the fly, but I don't. You know, I just don't. I haven't had any break-offs with the 0.20. I've gone down an odd time to 0.18. You could say that most of the fluorocarbon, just to say that, most of them would work. If I've been honest, I only use one brand of fluorocarbon for mullet, and I struggle to get it. It is sold in Ireland, but not in the diameters, or it's never in stock in the diameters when I'm looking for it. Okay. Hands down for me, the Saltwater Elite competition. That's, if I was to pick the tippet material that's been reliable the whole summer for me, and I've no connection obviously with Saltwater or anything like that, that tippet material, I found it really worked well for me in the clear water. You could use Hanak and the usual ones, but I don't know what it was with that stuff. I just found it really good. Your setup then, I suppose, if I was to recommend it, I don't like giving away tips, but anyway, I'll give away a few tips on the podcast, I suppose.
And fair play to you, Jason.
Right?
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't like to. Yeah, look, what I would say, and Dara's been out with me and a few lads, I would set up as if I was setting up for 3 wets. Right, so 2 droppers and a point. Okay. And I would fish 2 flies. So I'd fish a point fly and I'd fish the dropper above it. So let's say you're going 4 feet apart, so 12 feet. So it's okay with a 9-foot rod. And if you have a scoopy landing net, you land your fish if you're wading or whatever. Landing nets are handy because you're wading some of the time. The landing net's a good accessory. We might go through the accessories even. It's important. What I would do is I fish 2 flies. I would normally fish some type of apps, wormy looking, there's various versions. Colin McLeod has a few good patterns. Red usually is a good color in these. And then you can fish different types of shrimpy looking flies. So a shrimp as in like a scud type shrimp. Or you can fish dowelback type flies, usually with red beads, called the mullet back. Again, one of Colin's patterns. I'd have little variations of my own, but those types of flies. And I normally start with 2. And what it means is if I want to switch to the bung, I tie it on the top dropper. So if you can get a bung, the Fario type bungs with the hook in them. And then if I'm not wanting to fish the bung, I have the option of fishing a 3rd pattern. Okay, so you don't want to usually fish 3, even with a light breeze in the salt, with a 5 weight and a longish leader. And sometimes I do want to fish longer leaders, if I can get away with it, just to spread out the flies a bit. But, if you're fishing with 2 and you want, okay, these don't seem to be working. And sometimes a change of fly really triggers with mullet. So it just gives you the option of putting on a 3rd. And I'm not sure, I think Dara has Colin's book, so he might know better than me, but I think he generally kind of tends to recommend 2 flies at this stage. And I think he says that he started with 3. I think I came across something Colin had said about starting with 3. And then he eventually said, look, 2 flies is enough. And that's funny because after spending the whole summer at this most days, I started off with 3. Kind of getting the lake fishing mentality. Tom would probably fish 4 or 5, he'd get away with it. But no, only joking. 6, yeah. But no, you do have that in your head from wet fly, 3, this team of 3. But the advantage to me is the ability to tie on the bung and take off the bung. And doesn't matter if your bung is over depth. It's only a sighter. It's only, for takes. So I'm not too pushed about like having the bung up the line. And it's good to anchor the flies, which is a bit different to bung fishing, say in a small still water where you probably want them off the bottom, or sometimes actually they're not that deep at all. You're just using the bung again as an indicator. So don't worry about, having your bung at 8 feet in 4 feet of water. That's not going to make a big difference. But yeah, that just the ability to chop and change quickly, because depending on what the fish behavior is will dictate, because if the fish aren't stopped in front of you, the bung isn't much hope to you. And you mightn't want to start ripping the flies through them in case they'd shift off. So it's easy to just tie the bung on, throw it out, leave it there. It might be for 10 or 20 casts. And then the fish will start to move around and other fish will come in. And if you want to switch back, just cut off the bung. So the easiest way of doing that is just to have a dropper for the bung to attach it to. You know,
Makes perfect sense. That really does, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, it's like, you know, where you'd say with 4-fly casts, you can switch from buzzers to dries very easily. But everything's happened fast with the saltwater because you have to remember the tide's moving and the fish are moving. So, you know, as opposed to like a small still water where there's not much movement. And even in the loch, like if you're buzzer fishing, the conditions, you know, the boat's not moving that fast a lot of the time. So, you know, you've no way, you can't control the tide. Tide's going to be rushing in or rushing out regardless. So you have to be quick to change, you know, and that's one of the things when you're guiding, like where you're saying to a guy, we're going to the bung now. And it's like, we're doing it now fast. You know, we're not going to take 10 minutes to tie on this bung. We're going to do this thing in the next 2 minutes. And equally, 10 minutes later, so take that bung off again. They're probably looking at me going, Jesus, your man's a nightmare here. But, you know, you're just watching the fish behavior and you're just changing, like, and it's that feeding behavior. And sometimes the feathers, like, they're like, Dara's been down literally hundreds of these yolks in front of you. I mean, hundreds, like not 10 or 20 or 50. And you're looking at them and you're just going.
Sorry, but for those of us who don't have visual, as Jason said that, Darren's head just dropped. You might have heard the thud because it hit the microphone. And actually, Dara has been telling me about it. Sorry,
but it is that addictive thing, though, Jason. Like I said, it's small steps. It's like, okay, I've seen them this year. Next year, I will hopefully hook one.
You will. I mean, look, I'm not blaming user error for the one that got away, but
shut up. I mean? Go on. You will. Go on.
We'll hook them, right? Like I had a guy this year covering ticks one morning at first light. I don't want to say too much. You remember him talking about it, but he missed the strip. It was the most perfect. We could see the V of the mullet coming in nice and steady. I'd say it was a good tick clip too. You know, probably like ticks can be 5-6 pound where we meet them. Yeah. And we were at these shoulder ticks for a while. They'd been there for the days before. You know, there was a nice pattern to them. I brought them down. I said, ticks here now. Nothing happened. Funny again, it was shite until the sun came up. And the minute the sun came up, it was like you flicked the switch, they just appeared. And once the sun was on it and it was getting bright and it was warming up, they were getting fairly active and they were really feeding it. I said, you're going to get one, you know, you were just going. Then there was nothing happening, just casting at them. Then it just comes here with this big V coming after, a bit like the salmon on the loch, Tom. You know, when you see this thing coming after, except you're expecting this fish to take, right, and not just follow you. And just when the fish took it and turned, I mean, it was textbook. He went to strip strike and his hand went down and there was no line in his hand, right? So the fish turned, he still had the fly in his mouth. So then he went to strip strike the second time and he kind of plucked it out of him. Oh. And he kind of looked at me like, oh, effing this and that, you know, I missed him. And on the next strip, the fish took it again and then he struck, right? So he didn't strip strike at all. He just lifted and pulled out. Oh. I don't know, could have been a fly rod went heading off into the shoreline or the man could have threw himself in, or you can imagine you're an hour and a half at this maybe and you get this perfect take and invariably this is always happening to people. You know what I mean?
It is. It's
funny. It was funny story. Ken Whelan was down with me in the summer and we were fishing and again, you know, Ken had caught mullet, but he hadn't done a lot of fly fishing for mullet like these golden greys because they weren't around always. You know what I mean? They're new enough species in terms of mullet, like, and you know, they weren't always in the Irish shoreline, like, you know, I think they're Mediterranean type species.
Well, actually, sorry, just quickly before you go on there, and is that because of the changing temperature of the oceans that's why we're seeing them now coming up?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, gilt-head bream. There's other species, you know. I mean, obviously, Ken being the marine biologist now could probably list a few for you, but the ones we see when we're fishing around, say, southeast of Ireland, are the gilt-head bream that kind of never were there until the last 10 or whatever years, and the golden greys, you know, they used to always be there. Now they're there, which is great for us. more fish to try and catch. I haven't caught any gilthead on the fly, but that's on my list as well. Yeah, I would get one on a clouser, I'd say. But anyway, we fished and the weather was a bit rough. You know, it wasn't ideal conditions, but he'd come down and we were trying a few things. And I had 2 golden, and I was under pressure to go home. I just had to be back at something on. So I said, can you just keep going? There's about another 40 minutes in it. And I was walking back and I took off the line tray and took off the finger guard, because you really, the line tray is really useful, and the finger guard for any saltwater fishing. And I was nearly back to the start. And whenever I looked, I saw these fish moving, and I just thought they're feeding. Look, they're really feeding. So back on with the line tray, back on with the finger guard. And
it wasn't that important then, was it?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's different levels of importance at times. Well, it was just one cast. Yeah, I know that one. I'm just going to give this one cast. It's only 5 minutes. And it was a lad had been out fly fishing for bass. He was from Kilkenny. I think he was from Thomastown, he told me. And he was walking in the shore. And I thought, this lad's going to see these fish and he's going to probably cover them. And he might think they're bass. And, you start throwing, he might have a 9-weight or something. And that's not going to maybe work with these tick lips, because they might mess off, and go off. So I moved fairly fast for me to get down, to get a cast at them. And, no offense to Chad, I just thought he mightn't realise they were mullet. And he was almost maybe 50 yards or whatever. And I had 2 casts, I think, second or third cast, and I got buried into a really good, actually, no, it might have been my first cast, come to think of it. Could have even been the first cast. I buried into a tick, and he came down in fairness, he's very helpful. He said, I'll land him for you, and he landed the fish. And he looked at me and he said, what kind of mullet is it? And I said, it's a tick lip. He said, I thought they were hard to catch. He said, you just walked down through it out and you caught one. And I kind of said, what am I going to say? And I said, no, they're hard to catch. So he stood beside me and I had a few more casts, and I hooked another one and it came off. And I looked at my watch and said, I'm going to be killed. I really need to get going. I thought afterwards, poor chap thinks he just get a fly, tie it onto a 5 or 6 weight and throw it out, and his mullet are just going to start taking it. Little does he know, this could take weeks to start catching them. But it was just, how easy that fish took. Just walked in through that and he took it. Strange when they're feeding, and that's the key thing.
What's your most memorable fish on the fly this year? Please let it be a mullet that you can.
Well, the one that's in my mind most, but that's a nightmare from Loch Corrib that I'm not going to discuss. A place called Tiernan. I'm haunted by that fish until I catch my next Tiernan fish. Yep. I'm absolutely haunted by this fish.
You never grow old in Tiernan.
I'll tell you this.
Don't fall off that horse, though.
And look, I'm telling you, sometimes it's the fish you lose, right? You get to a stage where the one you lose and you don't see and you can't tell how big it is, it wrecks your head, right? But look, I've had two, we'll say, decent bass on the fly, where you're talking in around 70 centimetre, which is kind of, you're talking about fish, 8 pound, some, over 70 is probably a bit bigger. I've had 2 of them, but that one I was saying to you, where the conditions were so good. You guys saw the video. I wouldn't share. Look, no offense to people, I wouldn't share it with many other people of what the conditions were like and the amount of fish that were in front of me on that particular evening. It was real textbook. Just getting dark, massive spring tide, complete flat calm, fish feeding around. And that fish, I mean, he moved a couple of times, and I knew by the swirls that this was no small fish. Like, now he wasn't gigantic, you're not saying 12 pound, but he was probably around, you're talking about a fish 78 or 68 centimeters he was, I think. So, he's close on 8 pound by the conversion. And just that fish and the fact that the little fly, and changing the setup and again doing it quickly. It's like, when a plan comes together, because you could very easily have your sand eel pattern on or whatever and just keep throwing it out. And I don't think that fish was going to take it that particular evening. So it's kind of, as you say, it's putting all the stuff together, and reacting quickly. And it's the same, I'm sure, Tommy, you're drifting down the lake and there's olives hatching and mayflies hatching, and, you're fishing one thing and you see this fish moving and you go, hang on, he's not actually on mayflies at all. He's on an emerging olive. You put one on, throw it over him, and you nail him. And if he happens to be a big fish, there's real satisfaction, I think, in getting it right sometimes. I get it wrong most of the time. So, when you get it right. So, yeah, that fish, and he was very strong fish. And I would say where he took was probably 5 or 6 feet deep. I wouldn't think it was any deeper. It might actually have been less because, the ground isn't a consistent depth. It wasn't deep. The water was gin clear, flat, calm. And, yeah, that was just he earned that fish,
Speaking of plans coming together, I presume then, I get the sense, Jason, with you and mullet, you're getting a lot more of the pieces of the jigsaw starting to kind of fall into place. Like, do you feel like next season you'll target them even more and even more pieces will come together?
Yeah, look, if we get conditions, that's the thing as well. I mean, it's like hatches and different things. You need conditions, but I suppose the way climate change seems to be going, we are likely to get, drought type, very hot, heat wave type conditions, and they're ideal. They really are. And look, it's something new. It's different. Even the flight tying side of it. Just tying the patterns, experimenting. We're at the stage where you tie a woolly bugger with a red butt, and then we tie a woolly bugger with a green butt, and then we tie it with a pink butt, and and we've more variegated shades of rabbit for tying zonkers, but they're all zonkers, whereas apart from what Colin and say Darren, and there's other guys in the UK, I don't know the guys, but apart from what they've done, and some of the fly patterns and gone through it, I think it's embryo stage compared to salmon or trout. I'm sure there's more patterns and more things you can do to catch them, that just the more lads are fishing. I guarantee you, right, if you had mullet fly fishing competitions, like proper, competitions, you'd see fly patterns coming out. You get the top 20 lads all the time doing it. And that's the difference, you see it with the river lads, and you see it with the lake lads. They're just the small little things. Mullet aren't fished for with the fly to that extent. So I think there's loads of scope.
You might have hordes of river anglers coming down to the coast in the summers to come. Jason, if people want to find out more, I know you've got your YouTube channel, and if they're interested maybe in guiding, give us a bit more detail in terms of the links.
Yeah, I do a bit of flight tying over the winter, and a few new patterns for the mullet and that I'm messing about with in the summer. Game Fishing Ireland on YouTube. Same with gamefishingireland.ie on the web. They're the two main ones. And usually I'm at any of the angling shows in the south. We do the podcasts and stuff like that as well. So anyone has any questions, I'd usually try my best to help them. But definitely, and even the flight tying, it's not complicated. There's not that many patterns, and the patterns are not too hard to tie. And I think it's most river lads that tie a few flies, or that would be able to tie them .
Well, it's a growing space in terms of, and I hope we've given some kind of, and you've given a great explanation of it, Jason. And I do think it's really interesting, that crossover that you're seeing between the river anglers and the lochs anglers, to this branch of it on the salt. So I think it's definitely one to watch. And please help me get one on the fly next season, please.
Do you know? You have to catch them.
Exactly.
I'm waiting. I just need to get Tom down.
Yeah, I tell you, Tom would do brilliant on it.
I think he would really good. I might even put him where there is one.
I'm already. Oh, well, you did tell me you would do that, actually.
Yeah. I would. The other 500 will be on the other end of the beach, but we put you where there's one anyway.
Good man. Good
Want to
man.
make it too easy.
Yeah. It's on my small bucket list.
You'd enjoy it, like I say. I know one
look
of the
at that,
guys
yeah.
asked me, so
I used to when I used to live in Galway. I used to look at them in Lochatalia, because I used to live down. I used to live in Remore, couple of places there, and they used to come into Lochatalia, which is anybody knows Galway. If you come in by the train, and the last bridge just before you come into Cant Station, if you look on the right hand side, there's a little inlet there. That's Lochatalia, and during the summer, it just used to heave with mullet in there, absolutely heave with it. I used to go down and just look at them. I was going to go, you can't catch these on fly. That's what I've been told. But that was 20 years ago, so things are different then.
Not anymore.
some people will agree with you still, Tom. It's not easy at times.
Jason O'Riordan, thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks, lads.
Our thanks to Jason O'Riordan for joining us on the show. Don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.